everyone, welcome to Sabbath School Gems, where each week we showcase key concepts from this week's Seventh-day Adventist Sabbath School lesson. Hello everyone, welcome to Gems. This is Lesson 2 for the third quarter, titled Restless and Rebellious, for Sabbath, July 10. And this is from the quarterly Rest in Christ. And this lesson has a lot of gems that are just sitting on the surface. They're all in the lesson study, so we don't have to do much digging for them. And it starts out with, it goes through a lot of text that, if you will recall, last quarter when we studied the New Covenant, we realized that the New Covenant was no different than the Old Covenant. It's God's everlasting covenant. It's the same. And the only difference is that with the New Covenant, people will actually accept it, and that's the difference. God will still keep scribing the tables of stone over and over again, but what will man do with it? What will he do with that covenant? And you recall that the children of Israel pretty much rejected the covenant from the very get-go. From the time they got taken out of Egypt, they were telling Moses, you go to the mountain, you interface for the Lord for us. We'll die if we interface with him. And the Lord said, you're right. And so these texts that we're going to go through in this lesson are just showing and demonstrating that exact rejection, basically, of this covenant relationship. And so we'll go through these different stories, which I say are gems. They're not gems in the sense that they're sparkling and beautiful, but they are very important stories, and they do demonstrate what exactly was going on with the children of Israel and how they were not accepting it as a people. They were not accepting God from the very beginning. From the very beginning, it's not like they accepted it and they were rebellious from the get-go as soon as they got out of Egypt. So the first story that we have is in Numbers 11, and that's a story when they were complaining because the Lord was giving them manna to eat, but they said, and I'm reading in Numbers 11, verse 4, it says, Now the mixed multitude who were among them yielded to intense craving, for the children of Israel also wept again and said, Who will give us meat to eat? We remember the fish which we ate freely in Egypt, the cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, and the garlic, but now our whole being is dried up. There is nothing at all except this manna before our eyes. And, the manna sounded pretty good, and it goes on to say it tasted like pastries almost, but they were just getting sick of it. And what was really happening is they were longing for what they had. Some people think of the wilderness. In fact, even the lesson study in I think in Thursday's lesson, it talks about or refers to the wilderness as some desolate, dangerous place or something. But being a hiker and being a backpacker that I am, I think of, when I'm out and away in the wilderness or in nature, I just call it God's garden. And I think that what's happening here is they came out of Egypt and they were pretty much in a place where they could hear God's voice. They could see the starry skies. They could smell the fresh air. They can see the beautiful flowers and things that were happening. We think of it as a desert, but it's a desert today, but I'm not sure it was a desert then. It was wilderness area. It wasn't inhabited. It didn't have croplands and things. And they could just, and if you've ever been backpacking like I have for weeks at a time, just out in the backcountry, there's 4 things that you worry about. You worry about food, and you worry about water. Where are you going to get the water? Are you going to filter the water? How much water do you have to carry? And you worry about the elements, mostly the sun, which can get really intense at high altitudes, and especially if you're out in it all day, and the inclement weather if that happens, but nighttime it gets cold. So you worry about, the elements. And then the 4th thing is your shoes, because I've been in situations where I said, if anything happened to my shoes, I don't think I could make it out of here. You can't climb on rocks with bare feet. And those 4 things were the 4 things that God took care of for them. They had food. They had this manna. It just showed up at this, every day. As much as they needed to eat, it showed up. They didn't have to worry about it. They didn't have to work for it. They just had to gather it and pretty much cook it and eat it. And they had protection from the elements, the fire by night and the pillar of cloud by day. So they were protected from the elements. They had water. And it said their shoes didn't wear out. So God was taking care of all those needs. So they had this time when they really could spend time with God and to hear his voice and to just marvel in his creation. It's like a Sabbath for them. And, I do call it, God's garden, because things in nature, they're in balance, and things are more in balance than they are in the cities. And it's the cities and the Egypt that they were leaving that had the problems. But where they were, they could just spend that time with God. But it's like taking a kid, who, taking him away from all his toys and his friends and everything, and taking him to the beach. And you can get two outcomes there. You can get a kid that's like, oh, the beach, and just has a blast and is playing in the water and playing in the sand and just having a fun. Or you can have a kid that maybe he doesn't like the beach. And now he's missing his friends and his computer games and his TV and, everything. And that kid's not going to be happy. Well, it's kind of like this. If we come out into God's wilderness where we can hear his voice, do we want to commune with him? If that's what we want to do, it's perfect, because we have no distractions. We have everything. God's ready to meet with us, ready to consecrate us, and, everything's perfect for that. But if you don't want to commune with God, then you're going to get restless. And that's what was happening here. They're getting restless. They're longing for what they left. I guess they kind of had selective memory and were forgetting about the bondage. They were probably thinking before the bondage, hey, things were pretty good there. We had things, we could buy things, So they're longing for this, and they want this meat to eat. And what happens is God says, okay, I'm going to give them meat. And it says, then you shall say to the people, he's talking to Moses, he says, consecrate yourself for tomorrow, and you shall eat meat. For you have wept in the hearing of the Lord, saying, who will give us meat to eat? For it was well with us in Egypt. Therefore the Lord will give you meat, and you shall eat. You shall eat not 1 day, not 2 days, nor 5 days, nor 10, nor 20 days, but a whole month, until it comes out your nostrils and becomes loathsome to you, because you have despised the Lord who is among you, and have wept before him, saying, why did we ever come out of Egypt? And I think you know the story about this. They did eat these quail. He sent the quail, and there was just, it says, and I'm reading in verse 31 of Numbers 11, it says, now a wind went out from the Lord, and it brought quail from the sea and left them fluttering near the camp, about a day's journey on the side and about a day's journey on the other side, all around the camp, and about 2 cubits above the surface of the ground. And the people stayed up all that day and all night and all the next day and gathered the quail. He who gathered least gathered 10 homers, and they spread them out for themselves all around the camp. But while the meat was still between their teeth, before it was chewed, the wrath of the Lord was aroused against the people, and the Lord struck the people with a very great plague. Now, we don't know exactly what's going on here, and a lot of people will look at this and say, well, why did God give them meat? He's just going to kill them and strike them. But, first of all, I don't think this is talking about the quail that we know today. The birds in the Bible are not accurate for, the Bible translators, they did a really excellent job on a lot of things, but they just were not biologists, and they didn't have all the perspective of all the animals and creatures that we have today. So this probably wasn't quail. In fact, I have my ideas. I'm not saying this is what it is, but I think it was probably a bird that's very similar to the sand grouse, which is not a grouse, by the way. The sand grouse, you should look it up. It's actually related to pigeons, and in that family of pigeons and doves. And it's a bird that would be found around that area, and it's probably an extinct version of that bird. But I wouldn't be surprised if it was a close relative of that bird. That would be something that could come in really large quantities. And, just like pigeons, they don't see well at night, it would be fairly easy to gather them. And you think about the passenger pigeons, which are extinct now too, but they were just massive, massive quantities. And we're talking about these birds just, all the way around, a day's journey. We're talking a lot of birds. And, there's one thing that I think about is also possible. And like I said, I'm not saying that this is how it happened, but I'm saying it could happen. And, some of these birds, when they eat seeds, because they're seed-eating birds, they're like the pigeons, and they can get toxins in their body from the seeds that they eat. So they could be eating toxic seeds, but it doesn't hurt them. And it kind of concentrates in their blood and gets filtered out to their body. So it doesn't really get in their flesh, and it doesn't harm the birds. So the birds are perfectly fine. But if you were to eat them, you could have problems if you would eat the blood. And, the other thing is that it would happen really rapidly. It could happen very rapidly if you were to eat birds that were had these toxins in them. It just gets to your kidney. You get to a certain point where your body can filter it out, and then you get overloaded, and then that's it. You would die fairly rapidly, and that's what it kind of sounds like. It sounds like they were, dying. It was still being chewed. It was still in their teeth, and that would make sense if they had some kind of toxin like that. And I'm not trying to say there's an explanation for everything, but I think that was could be the case, and maybe likely was something like that going on. So you see, if the people were just eating, a little bit of meat and were properly preparing it without the blood, it probably wasn't a problem for those people. But it was the ones that were just either consuming large quantities, or they weren't properly preparing it, they weren't getting all the blood out. And you could see how those people might be the ones that were struck. So anyway, that's just a possibility. But the bottom line is that they were eating this quail that they were just longing for, and kind of treating it in a gluttonous way, and they were dying from it right away. And so that's what happened with that scenario. So, and if you look at it, it's just still God reaching out, trying to help us. He wants us to be happy, but he wants to teach us that he is the one that provides for us, and that what he provides is good. And I'm sure that there was a lot of people in that camp that were, they thought maybe they wanted the quail, and then they said, the manna's pretty good. And they probably went back to the manna, and especially as they saw other people getting sick from the meat, that they were not going to question God, that they were getting, in other words, this experience, I think, drew more people to God and drew them closer to God. And that's the way he works. He works by making good things out of bad. And this was bad because the people were rejecting him, and they were asking for something that was not good for them. So that's the story. And the second story that we have where they were rebelling is in Numbers 12, and that is the incidents with Miriam and Aaron when they spoke against Moses because of his wife. And the lesson brings this out. It says that was just kind of a pretext. So yes, Moses' wife was a different ethnicity from them, and we don't know exactly what, but they were kind of picking on him because of her. But the lesson said, he says, is a pretext. What was really at issue, and it goes on to say that in the next, just the next few verses, is that they were really jealous of Moses, and they're jealous of his prophetic ability and the fact that God was working toward him. If you recall, the only reason why Aaron was really involved, and probably Miriam too, was just because Moses was a little weak and he didn't trust God. He was concerned with how he could speak to all these people, and so he was concerned, and he went to the Lord, and so the Lord said, okay, I'll give you Aaron. Aaron will be your spokesperson. You'll be giving him all the stuff. He'll just be the spokesperson. And Miriam was probably in some kind of administrative role too. She was probably helping them out too. But, Moses was the one that God was working with and helping him to be able to lead the people and lead them out of Egypt. And so they kind of had back seat, and now when Moses said, he was getting kind of overloaded, and God said, okay, you call 70 prophets, 70 elders, and he's going to rest that on them, and then they're going to prophesy. So you can see that that Miriam and Aaron were, maybe because of that too, they felt a little put out, and so they were picking on Moses, but what they really were started saying is, what gives this, I'll just read Numbers 12 in verse 2. It says, "So they said, 'Has the Lord indeed spoken only to Moses? Has he not spoken through us also?' And the Lord heard it. Now the man Moses was very humble, more than all men who were on the face of the earth. Suddenly the Lord said to Moses, Aaron, and Miriam, 'Come out, you three, to the tabernacle of meeting.' So the three came out. Then the Lord came down in a pillar of cloud and stood in the door of the tabernacle and called Aaron and Miriam, and they both went forward. Then he said, 'Now hear my words. If there is a prophet among you, I, the Lord, make myself known to him in vision. I speak to him in dreams. Not so with my servant Moses. He is faithful in all my house. I speak with him face to face, even plainly, not in dark sayings, and he sees the form of the Lord. Why then were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses?'" So this is really putting Moses, Aaron and Miriam in their place. So what God is saying is, hey, I speak with Moses even closer than the prophets. I mean, this is a man who is really humble, and he listens to me, and I speak to him just face to face. That's a close, really close relationship. And here Aaron and Miriam just want the glory of it. They want, they're jealous. But they can form a relationship with the Lord too, but they didn't. They just want the show of it, and they're jealous of Moses and envious of that position. And that's really dangerous. I think that's why God comes out right away to rebuke them, because that's the sin that was in the Garden of Eden. That was Satan's problem. He wanted to be above, and he wanted to have a different position than he had. And anytime we start finding ourselves, wanting a different position or something, better, or that this person has, that God can't work with us, because we're all to be part of a body. Some of us are going to be eyes, some are going to be legs, and some of us are going to be the body, the private parts, which it says in the New Testament are actually the most revered, because they're taken care of and they're covered, and they're so every part is important. If you look at a cell, every part of a cell needs to do its function for that cell to work. And so if we're want to be part of God's kingdom, and we're not happy with what he gave us. There's some people, they want to change their hair color. They want to change this. They want to change that. Nowadays, they want to change their sex. They want to change things. And, we need to be comfortable and happy with what God, that's the tragedy, is that I think we are happiest how God made us. Yeah, we have aging, and we have things that we need to do sometimes to combat that, because we were never meant to age. It's like a vitamin deficiency. So there's things we do. But, we have to be comfortable with our role in this life and our role with God and his kingdom. And, Miriam and Aaron were not happy with their role. They wanted something better. They wanted what Moses had, or they wanted, they said, well, we're just as good as prophets. Doesn't the Lord speak through us? Well, they were the spokesman, but they're kind of, like I said, more administrative roles. They weren't the real deal, which was Moses was getting the information straight from God. So anyway, that's why he comes out, and Miriam gets leprous, and it's a big deal. It's a real big deal. And Aaron, if he were to get leprous, and he wouldn't be administering, and finally God says, okay, well, she's just going to let her be like this for a week. Let you guys all think about this. So 7 days she was unclean with his leprosy, not being sure if God was going to heal her, but he did. That was enough for them to realize, okay, don't mess with Moses. He's my servant, and he's doing my work. And anyway, but that is a form of rebellion that we can see. They weren't forming that relationship with God. And so now we get to the other story we have, and that's when when they came into the boundaries of the promised land, and they were going to go into this land, and they sent the people to go scope out the land. And, if you remember, they went and they scoped it out, and they said, oh, there's giants in the land, and we're like grasshoppers. And so they all started complaining again. And they're like, we can't go up and face these, we can't go take the land. And I'll just read it here in Numbers 13, 27 through 33. So let's see, Numbers 14, I'll read in verse 6. So it says, but if you recall, there's Joshua and Caleb, and it says, but Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jephunneh, who were among those who had spied out the land, tore their clothes. And they spoke to all the congregation and the children of Israel, saying, the land we passed through to spy out is an exceedingly good land. If the Lord delights in us, and he will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land which flows with milk and honey. Only do not rebel against the Lord, nor fear the people of the land, for they are our bread. Their protection has departed from them, and the Lord is with us. Do not fear them. So Caleb and Joshua said, you know what? Yes, this land is really good, and yeah, there might be giants in there and everything, but God is with us. He's going to help us. He said he's going to give us this land, and we need to go in there. And the congregation, how they reacted, they wanted to stone Joshua and Caleb. And they just were rejecting God. They were rejecting what God was telling them, and they didn't want to go up. And they didn't go up, and they got rebuked for that. And then the story that then after that, God wasn't happy with them. And then, so what did they do? They said, okay, well now we'll go up. Okay, because now we feel bad because we rejected God, and God's upset with us, so now we'll go in. And then it was clear that they were not supposed to go in then. They were supposed to go in when God told them to go in. And so this is another thing that can happen is, if we do something wrong, you heard the saying, 2 wrongs don't make a right. And, they didn't listen to God when he said to go up. And then when they didn't go up and they were rebuked for that, then they said, well, okay, we will go up now. But see, they want to do it on their terms. And that's just another form of not listening to God, because he said, no, you're not to go up there. And I'll just read in verse 41. And Moses said, now why do you transgress the command of the Lord? For this will not succeed. Don't go up, lest you be defeated by your enemies, for the Lord is not among you. For the Amalekites and the Canaanites are there before you, and you shall fall by the sword, because you have turned away from the Lord. The Lord will not be with you. And indeed, the Lord was not with them. The ark didn't go up with them, and they were defeated. And a lot of them lost their life because they would not listen to the Lord. So, that whole lesson is about trusting the Lord and not just wanting to get the outcome and doing it our way. And that's exactly what they did. And even their reaction was, well, we'll do it when, we want to do it. And that's just the wrong message. The whole message is to learn how to trust God. That's why he brought them out of Egypt, so he can talk to them and have this covenant relationship with them as a close people to him. And recall when they came out of Egypt, they plundered the Egyptians. I mean, they were decked out. They had the nicest clothes, and they had all this jewelry that they were given. Because if you recall, the Lord had them find favor in the sight of the people. So they had all these things, and what did they do with the jewelry? Well, they melted it all down right away to build a golden calf. Say, this is a God that brought us out of Egypt. So you can see how that was a form of rebellion early on, right away. They were already giving their finest and best that God provided for them to an idol. And these are other forms of this sort of idolatry, that we're going to worship God in the way that we want to worship him, and we're going to listen to him when we want to listen to him. We're going to basically do what we want. And so it's really bad when God is telling us to do things and we're not doing it, and then we still don't listen to him. Now we'll see what Ellen White says about that. She says, now they seem sincerely to repent of their sinful conduct, but they sorrowed because of the result of their evil course, rather than from a sense of their ingratitude and disobedience. So see, they were upset because, they had disobeyed and they didn't get the prize. Like, they were convinced that maybe God would have given them that land. And when they found that the Lord did not relent in his decree, their self-will again rose, and they declared that they would not return into the wilderness. In commanding them to retire from the land of their enemies, God tested their apparent submission and proved that it was not real. They knew that they had deeply sinned in allowing their rash feelings to control them and in seeking to slay the spies who had urged them to obey God. But they were only terrified to find that they had made a fearful mistake, the consequences of which would prove disastrous to themselves. Their hearts were unchanged, and they only needed an excuse to occasion a similar outbreak. This presented itself when Moses, by the authority of God, commanded them to go back into the wilderness. But faith is in no sense allied with presumption. Only he who has true faith is secure against presumption, for presumption is Satan's counterfeit of faith. Faith claims God's promise and brings forth fruit in obedience. Presumption also claims the promises, but uses them as Satan did, to excuse transgression. Faith would have led our first parents to trust the love of God and to obey his commands. Presumption led them to transgress his law, believing that his great love would save them from the consequences of their sin. It is not faith that claims the favor of heaven without complying with the conditions on which mercy is to be granted. Genuine faith has its foundations in the promises and provisions of the Scripture. And how much, I think the lesson might have asked this question, just, what is the difference between this faith and presumption? Because, when we step out and just act boldly, even look at what Abraham did with getting a son. God promised him that, but instead of waiting for Isaac, him and Sarah plotting, or I don't know how much of it was each of their idea, but plotting of how they're going to get this son that God promised them, and they're taking it into their own hands. And when we start doing that, and we just start acting in the name of God presumptuously, saying, well, God's going to bless me, he said this, and but we're not listening to him and reacting to what he's saying and not going to him. And this is the problem, because this is the only thing that is going to help us, is if we can make that connection with God, so that he can write his laws on our hearts. That's that new covenant, that he's going to write his laws so that when we act, we are acting in concert with him and his will and his ways. And it's only when we have that connection and we can hear his voice, when we're running and doing things in our own way, even if it's in the name of the Lord, that's the problem. And it's a problem with Eve. She was deceived into thinking it's okay to not trust God. And, we see the same thing. Sometimes it's, we think that, well, we don't have to follow God. We have grace. God will forgive us. And it's really, that's an act of presumption as well, to think that, well, if we sin, God will forgive us, so it's okay. Instead of really wanting to form this relationship where God is motivating us each step of the way, and we're not just presuming that, what God will or will not do, but we are acting with faith. And acting knowing that God wants what's best for us and that we need to listen to him and obey him. And he gave us words. He gave us the Bible, and he wrote a lot of things in there. And, these are things that we need to heed, and we need to be able to hear his voice and act accordingly. So I think that's it for the gems for this lesson study, this lesson 2. And hopefully we'll get more gems next week. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Sabbath School Gems. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe, give us a rating, and spread the word to others. Comments and questions can be sent to us at sabbathschoolgems@gmail.com. Bye for now.